Yeah. Hello everyone who is here and who is also watching online. So thanks so much for making the time and effort to come for this event today, and also people who have joined online. So we are kicking off a series on software project management, and so this is the first in the series, and we hope there's going to be more talks. And so today we have with us Ranjan Sakale and Rubella Bhattacharya. So Rubella will be running today's event, and Rubella works as the head of Global Technical Program Management at Condé Nast. And with that, over to Rubella.
Thank you so much, Pramod. So, hi Ranjan.
Hi.
All right. So I'll go ahead and introduce Ranjan. For those who already don't know him, Ranjan has been heading the engineering side of the house at Vedantu. And prior to that, he was the CTO at Gojek. And he has over 2 decades under his belt as an engineering leader, and lots of battle stories and war stories for us. So thank you. Welcome to the session, Ranjan. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so shall we get started? Okay. So first off, I would say that software project management is hard, and it's very, very different compared to other kind of project management. So I would say, what are some moments in your career that you realized that a project that you had really planned for well in advance with a good team, yet you realized things were not going as per plan? And maybe it was because of some software delivery practice which was not in place. So would you like to share such an experience with us?
Yeah, I mean, project management is hard. Software project management is probably harder. Some echo. Okay. Yeah. So software project management is pretty hard. Primarily, there's crazy number of variables. You're building something for somebody who doesn't really know what they want half the time, or when they want it. They want it yesterday, and they obviously want it done as cheaply as possible. So yeah, I mean, that's just the start of it. There's you're working with a bunch of people you wouldn't, leave your kids with, for example, right? There's trust issues. There's you're not located with people together. There's tons and tons of levers, and project management is like it becomes so complex that we were talking about the other day that is people start treating it as astrology, that here is a method and you follow this method and then suddenly your result will be great. So yeah, I mean, many instances where in fact I've probably seen more failures than successes. And I mean, if you say success is defined as delivering something with high quality at the right time,
On budget.
on budget, I've never done it.
That's very candid of you.
Yeah, I've never been able to do it. I've rarely met people who have been able to. There's always one of the three that goes off. Right. So I don't really have an instance of when a particular practice was not followed or something like that. But I think there's lots and lots of examples that I can give about how the organization structure was not conducive to developing a product,
Right.
in the sense that when the team was building something, for everything they were dependent on some other team.
Yeah.
Right? And because of that, instead of being a product manager or an engineering manager, you end up being a program manager who's running around getting people to do stuff. So org structure is one problem. Another one is the quality of people where you have all the right ingredients, but people just don't have the sense of ownership to deliver something. More cases where your customers just not involved enough. They want something, but they don't want to come in, talk to you, test something. So you continue building for months and months, and then at the end of the day, they see something and say, "No, this is not what I wanted." So yeah, bunch of things.
Yeah.
I'm guessing there's a lot of practices
Yes.
that solve these problems. But
And that's my next question to you, because there are agile practices and agile tenets that are already in play, and as someone who's been in the industry and you've been running things from the front line as well, do you consider yourself a purist or a realist when it comes to any practice, any software delivery method or agile practice, Scrum, Kanban, Lean? There's so many things out there. So how would you, talk about your experience there? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, see, honestly, it's not a purist or realistic kind of a debate. I don't think I've ever done the same thing twice. In terms of practices, I believe in first principles based approach, and I think most of the processes that dictate terms are by design not going to work for everything.
Yeah.
Right? So when you look at maybe Scrum, you will see that it's designed for a certain size of an organization, certain thresholds on budgets in terms of the frequency of change, all of that, right? Compare that to maybe a startup like this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not a startup, but a small group of people building something like this.
Right.
They don't really need to go through that level of ceremony, right? So when you look at XP is more focused on engineering, less on the interaction between different stakeholders and stuff like that. But I think my 2 cents on this is every project, every team, every group is different. I think going back to first principles will tell you why you need to have a stand-up, why you should do pair programming. Sorry, I'm throwing
absolutely.
my dogmatic side.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you don't do a stand-up, you lose out on something.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't do pair programming, you lose out on something. If you're well prepared and insured for that, then why not just go ahead and do it, right? But most of the time, there's a reason why certain things work over a period of 20 odd years. And so for me, that method is fairly straightforward, right? Like I make sure that I iterate as small as possible. So, a weekly iteration. I don't really, so a lot of common practices in the industry where, you have a bi-weekly iteration. I mean, I don't know why that has come in, but it is there. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I've learned to do shorter, as short as possible. A week is good enough. I don't do things like, you have to release at the end of the week. That's another bad system of design, again, mostly from Scrum side. I think you deliver in a stream and then you measure in batches. That's the basic first principle approach of understanding how you're doing.
Right.
And then you retrospect, you figure out what you should improve, and then you improve. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of detail over there.
Yeah, because the
but
practitioners and the coaches will tell you that if you're not following, all the tenets as it's called out, you won't reap the benefits, right?
Yeah.
So,
unfortunately, most of the practitioners and the teachers who are teaching you certificates, they've probably never delivered a project.
that's a fair
They're
point.
great
Yeah.
trainers.
Yeah.
They're probably great at training, but give them a bunch of 12 people, 8, 12 people, give them a complex project. All of these practices, that they preach,
Yeah.
they'll realize what works, what doesn't work. And they'll stop saying, that this is a prescriptive method.
Right.
Actually, the thing that I would like to basically summarize this as is you should always have a method.
Right.
Right? but that method should be allowed to change as you observe changes or as you observe how the system is moving, right? And
Because
so
one size doesn't fit all.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
What works for a startup doesn't work for a, let's say, a Series A company, doesn't work for a a Series D company or a unicorn, right? It's all very different, and it's magnitudes of complex variables that come in as the size grows.
Yeah.
One person doesn't need project management.
Absolutely.
But as you go above 3 or 4, by the time you reach 10, you have. You
but
have
then
crazy
again, the
complexity.
other perspective is if you've seen something work, do you try and replicate it in the teams as they grow, or kind of help them understand what has worked and what hasn't, or do you let them come up with a homegrown method?
It will be foolish to ignore what has worked for you, right? And so, I mean, like I said, I always start with a prescriptive approach, right? Like this is my prescription. Like as a doctor, I say this is what we do in this team, right? And then week after week, you see, okay, what is working for us, right? If the stand-up's not adding value, then don't do. Actually, I've never seen that. But sometimes certain set of things. For example, IPMs are not helping because you're already sitting on a table, what's to be done, there's grooming is not needed. I mean, all the kind of, there's 12, 13, 1500 practices over there. You have to be very, very method and, number oriented. And that's basically the difference, right? So if you see, no project is similar to the other. That's like art, right? I'm a painter. I want to keep painting new things every time. But this is where it becomes a craft, where you look at the numbers. And there's no numbers in art. But in craft, you look at it and say, okay, this is what I'm measuring. And if it doesn't work for me, right, then I change something. And what do I change? Maybe I turn off a practice. Maybe I turn off some quality variable, change the budgets, like hire more people. Hiring more people never helps. But that's the method, right? That you start with a baseline, what has worked for you, and whatever you are comfortable with, and then you move forward.
Got it. No, I think that's excellent point. And to your earlier point, some of the practices don't make sense till you have a quorum. You have the right scale in place. Because many of these assume you need a standardized process across large group of people. But if it's small enough and you need to be flexible, not just agile, absolutely agree with your points.
Yeah, I mean, in our parlance, we say, are you capital A agile or really agile? Right? So,
fair enough.
But yeah, tell us how your experience been on the other side, right? You're working for a really huge organization.
For us, it's always about scale. So getting 73 Scrum teams to work together and deliver to a common goal, I think that's the problem of scale that we have. And if we don't have a standard set of process or language that we speak, it's hard for us to align and even measure what we are delivering. So in that case, I won't still say purist, but sticking to the tried and tested methods is preferred. Definitely. That's my 2 cents into it.
God, I don't envy managing 73 teams.
So yeah, it's then that's Scrum at scale. You're talking scaled agile framework. There's so many frameworks. But again, to your point, will SAFe work across the board? No, I've seen it fail and fail horribly in some of the earlier companies that I've worked with. So yeah, we've it all depends on the context. It all depends on the objectives that you're trying to achieve and your strategy. How do you get it in place? So I think that's critical, Ranjan. Yeah. And since I'm getting old. I'm going to refer to my notes for the next set of questions I have for Ranjan. So this one's interesting. How would you guide today's engineering leaders to situate themselves in this vast landscape that we have, right? The early stage, bootstrap, VC funded, post PMF. I mean, there's so many contexts. There's wartime versus peacetime, and what kind of situational awareness will you kind of help guide them in orienting themselves?
And I'm guessing about projects.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Even engineering, execution, and
Yeah.
delivery, I would
Yeah.
say.
No, situation's very different, right? So, for
Yeah.
example, when you look at a very small company, trying to find out PMF, product market fit, for them, wasting whatever they're doing is not really that bad.
Yeah.
Right? They're trying to build something, they experiment. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't work out, they throw it away, build something else.
Right.
So, for a lot of that, for example, would you prescribe them to write tests first? Probably, but if you want to prescribe them to write automation suites for everything they're doing,
Yeah.
maybe for a couple of flows, maybe a smoke test, but not like 80-90% coverage, right? Till you found PMF, and that's the next stage, right? So when you have found PMF and you know that customers are interested in what you're building, then your stance has to change,
Yeah.
right? And the stance changes to being more deliberate about these things, being bring in more discipline, not just about project management, but about people management as well, right? And by that time, you are probably not sitting on one table where the founder and the developer are preparing to build something. The team that is developing is maybe a level away, and therefore decision making becomes a problem, right? So you have start seeing the germination of your, Conway's law affecting your org design, your org designing affecting your system design, and vice versa. You start seeing that people who are given independence to execute, or teams that are there to independently execute, they do very well.
Yeah.
But teams who are, who have to depend on others, they start slowing down. Right? So you need to understand that and like start cutting out work in ways where you can give as much independent execution capabilities to people. Your hiring changes. First up, you are looking at hiring as many generalists and doers as possible. Now you start looking at maybe people who are specializing in certain areas, and how do you align a team around that, right? As you grow beyond that, you have multiple teams combining together to build something.
Yeah.
And this is where personally I've seen in the last 3-4 years of auditing a lot of organizations where the switch from Series C, Series D, Series A to Series D is where a lot of companies slow down very, 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 very often. I mean, I would say around, you talk to anybody who's running a Series D company, and they'll say their biggest problem is that the engineering is very, very slow. And the primary reason for that is that they ignored a lot of things that they should have done when they were small. Because changing things when you're small is very easy, comparably, right?
Absolutely.
If you want to say that I'm going to have a 90% test coverage and 90% automation coverage, easier to do when you have a smaller thing running. But when you have 20 odd people, it's easy. And when you have 120, it becomes harder. When you have 400, it's almost impossible to change something, right? The culture is already formed. Similarly, people practices, for example, if you do not have a proper job ladder in mind when you're 20, by the time you're 200, everybody has different titles, people have different expectations, nobody knows what their goals are.
Growth path.
Right? No growth path.
Yeah.
And, and suddenly you see that people are moving further away from decision makers, right? And the ones who are closer stick. The ones who are unfortunately away, they start moving out.
Yeah.
So there's a whole evolution of things that people who worked in these companies see. And coming back to project management, I think, like I said, there's rarely a situation that's common across the board, except for, I would say, good engineering practices, right? So that's something that you follow, good people management practices. Again, back to first principles.
And just double clicking on one of the areas, what would be the right time to bringing in project management practices? You mentioned setting the culture, the tone early in the formation of the teams and as the teams grow. But from your perspective, what would be the right time to bring in a structured project management um, in the organization? So I would say,
Yeah. See, I mean, my definition of a structured project management might differ from you.
yeah.
But I was building something last year alone, and I was doing structured project management.
Right.
So I don't think there's any size or anything. I think you should start from scratch.
Okay.
If you bring things in at any point of time later, things become harder and harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And when you the definition of structured project management might change over a period of time, but if you do not measure what you're doing and if you do not learn from that, and that's what I basically
Absolutely.
mean by structured project management, right? You have a clear idea about what you're doing, you estimate, your estimates are going to be wrong, but you know what they are. You understand how fast you can deliver on a weekly or like daily basis if you want to, and then you project, and then you figure out whether you're doing the right thing or not. What can you change? Do you need to hire one more person? Do you need to let go of somebody who's not working at quality?
Right.
And you change, right?
Yeah.
You go to 200, 300 people, the same practices become like some new ceremonies get added, but the idea is the same.
The foundation remains the same.
Exactly. And the later you start, the worse it is. Right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
if you're 20 odd people in your team and you're not managing work properly, chances are that you might have a great idea and you've hit PMF. By the time you're 100, 150, 200, you're going to slow down and somebody new will come in and bypass you within like a year's time. So you're the way I kind of started theorizing this is that up to around Series D, Series E, maybe even to unicorn level, startups grow because of operational chops and the great business idea that they have.
Right.
But beyond that, the only thing that takes them is great engineering discipline
Yeah.
and engineering skills that people have. Right? That's the kind of company that goes beyond Series D unicorn level to a bigger company, right?
Yeah.
So you can look at all the great companies right from the past, look Intel, HP, Google, Facebook, in India as well, right? Like a lot of great companies that you see, maybe not in the software domain, but I mean, you look at Infi and Wipro and
Yes.
all these great organizations, they're great beyond a particular scale because they have extreme discipline in whatever they do. We hate some of that discipline. We say, what, waterfall this, scrum that, extra. But there is some method to their madness. They go back, they improve, they keep on improving.
Inspect and adapt.
Exactly. It's not
we
chaos
use
at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And which is a great segue for the next question. Famous quote from Peter Drucker. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, in your case, would you say process for lunch? So.
Yeah, I mean, culture beats everything, and that's the thing that I keep trying to tell people, right? I mean, no matter what process you follow, if the people who are following that process, not just the manager, but everybody participates equally, any process can work. Doesn't matter actually no process will work. As long as people have a great sense of ownership and they're willing to communicate and trust each other. And that's what we kind of say, right? A good culture is that, people behave well even when nobody's watching, right? People behave the way the founders envision their teams to behave. And so the gap, obviously, like I said, in a startup, the gap is very small. as you grow, the gap increases.
Mm.
The distance between a founder and an engineer,
Mm.
or a CEO and engineer, is so vast
Mm.
that only deeply ingrained culture can actually help uh, bring in some sort of a semblance of uh, homogeneity in the organization, right? And once you have that going, I think a lot of things get out of the way, right? Like you were initially asking me about projects that have failed because of some practice. Most of the time, it's never a practice, right? A practice is just a symptom. It's because people are, not really bought into what they're doing, right? Like the greatest developer doesn't believe in what they're building. In a company with a great culture, that person would go and tell everybody that this is the bogus thing, we shouldn't be doing it. People listen to them, debate, and then once that person, let's say, disagrees but still agrees to go ahead, they would put in all their effort to it, right?
Right.
That's sort of culture.
Yeah.
Versus in a bad culture, they'll say, you know what, my job is on the line, I don't care, I'll just go ahead and do it 9 to 5, I'll wing it whichever way I do. They produce bad quality stuff, they infect everybody around them, and suddenly you see that there are delays, and so.
And what do you think the engineering leaders can do to influence the culture, like you said, right? Encourage people to speak up. What do you think you've seen work in the companies that you've led?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, there's a lot of literature on this, and I mean, and very contrasting as well.
Yeah.
See, I believe that leaders should be technically good. Okay, I mean, this is just a personal one of those purist arguments that you were talking about. I think if a leader is not technically good at what they're doing, whether they're founder, they're good at sales and marketing, and they understand the business in and out, they're domain experts, right? Similarly, a CTO who's not coding, they're not going to be able to affect people that well, right? So fundamentally, like those are the basic building blocks, right? That you're technically good, people trust you, and you are willing to let go of responsibility to other people, knowing that they will execute, and if they don't, you're going to work with them very closely and get. And I think this is, at this level is where most of the problems start. Again, the symptoms could be that people don't turn up on time, or people are not excited enough, and that's primarily because they don't buy into your idea, right? And so, or you did not listen to them when they were telling you what will work, what doesn't. Maybe they were wrong, but you did not even hear them. So there's a lot of fundamental things that have to work well together to build a great culture, right? And these are all very highly cliched things, but I've rarely seen them done well everywhere. Like making sure that you're always present, making sure that you're always there in the time of crisis, making sure that you're always listening to people when they're telling you, they're critical of you, instead of just listening to them when they're praising you. Right? Making sure that you're always praising as well as criticizing people, not just doing one or the other. Right? And trying to hire people, when you're hiring people, making sure that you're hiring people who are going to be a great addition to not just your project, but also to the culture of the organization.
Absolutely. Right. And I think psychological safety to make mistakes, giving the team sufficient space and not feel that there will be retribution if they fail or make mistakes. I think that is one of the concerns which often makes people shy away from being bold.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, honestly, today's world, if you're going to be harsh at people, they're just going to move on. So, I mean, there's always a wave, right? I mean, normally when there are when the job market is not great, you go
Yeah.
and start doing whatever you want to. People are okay.
Absolutely.
When it's like, last 3-4 years, if you're not that great as a manager, if you're not able to excite people to work for you and work with you,
Yeah.
people are going to find somebody else who does. And so it's not just a moral thing that you should keep your teams feel safe.
Yeah.
It's also an economic factor now,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I think, see, psychological safety is not just about giving people time and space. I think it's also this. So there are levers over there, right? So there's time and space. That's one thing. The other thing is, do people feel that they're contributing?
Yeah.
Because if you're not, don't feel that you're contributing, no matter how much time and space you get, you're going to feel lonely, and you're going to feel that that you're not worth, or rather, you feel less worthy as a human being. And then there's also peer groups, right? So you're as a manager, you might be great at giving people space. The peer group is a pressure group. Somebody in the organization is always telling people that this and that and whatever.
And there's always the toxic individual.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of things, and I think just like project management, people management is again not astrology. It's a bit harder. I would say project management is very easy compared to managing a group of people to be always healthy and peach of health, coming to the office in the morning, fresh, in the best state of mind, making sure that they're putting in their best shift, and then going back happy that they did accomplish something. That's perhaps the hardest thing to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been hogging the conversation with you. Any questions we can take at this point in time? Unfortunately,
I don't have that question.
There's one question from the live audience.
I don't have that page open.
Okay, I'll ask it. Okay, hold on. Okay, so one question from the live audience is that Ranjan is referring to keywords from Agile, but he says Agile may not work. How come?
Well, I mean, I started work. Sorry. Okay, so see, these keywords are basically part of my vocabulary because for the last 20 odd years, perhaps when I started working at ThoughtWorks back in 2006, right, and we were in those days. I mean, thankfully there was no Scrum at that time, so we were much lower level, less prescriptive. But yeah, I mean, I trained over there for 10 years. I still believe that's the best training school for anybody who wants to learn how to manage projects, manage people, be nice, build a nice organization, and and still focus at very high quality delivery on time. Right, so it's obviously part of my upbringing. It's like if you say, why am I talking in English? That's like I'm just used to doing that. So yeah, I mean using terms. But see, the reason I think it's an interesting question is because I think for me first principles are always still at a plane where Agile starts, and I don't mean Agile. I really mean iterative scientific method of delivering software or building software, right? So certain terms I think XP and Agile have kind of hijacked and made their own, but it doesn't mean that that I'm kind of professing that it will work. I think the second thing is, in general, the terminologies might be the same for capital A Agile and being really agile, but they're vastly different, right? So when I say iterative development, if you want to, if a 10-day iteration works for you, it works for you. I'll still call it iterative development.
so is it the blindly following some practice versus seeing if it makes sense?
Yeah, exactly. You see, if there's a manual and then you follow the manual, you better be lucky that that manual was written only for you.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, it's not going to work for you. Now, if you are like a little less lucky but still lucky, you might not fail, but you will be a bit delayed. Your things will not. But for the rest of the 99% of the people, nobody's that lucky. Right? You get lucky towards the end by making smart people like burn midnight oil and weekends and all that. But that's a recipe for losing out the best people, right? So in fact, like, since you asked, I think one of the other factors that comes in terms of people management, project management together, and successful delivery is to be able to keep the best people together for as long as possible. And this is again something that people take for granted, right? And that only happens when you've kind of worked together for a bit longer. So you have to train people less. They think like you. That's basically another part of culture, right? So I'm kind of still thinking in terms of ThoughtWorks culture. I'm sure Pramod as well thinks sometimes in those terms. Those terms are not as prescriptive as perhaps in a book that you may read. Right? It's much more loose and it's more first principles based.
Absolutely. All right. Any other questions? Here you go.
I am a project management noob. I only have to deal with project management. I'm not a project manager, I'm an engineer. And I have my own frustrations with project management as well. But a part of me always wonders that a lot of these methodologies seem to have come from consultancies, which used to deliver projects for customers where they had to understand requirements. And now we see all of these terminologies being adopted in product companies, which have to do more long-term visioning, building products across customers. And so in your experience, would you say there is a difference in the way these should be applied when building products versus services?
Well, great question. I think, see again, like I said, I don't really see huge difference in terms of following one practice and not following another practice, right? See, wherever that practice has come from, like I said, if you apply first principles and create a practice that works for you, right, a process that works for you, then that's a method to follow to, create some software out of nothing, right? Now, whether you work at a consultancy which is sitting outside delivering software, or you're sitting inside an organization building software with a long-term roadmap in mind, it doesn't really matter, right? It works, and it's a great method for you on that table. It works fine, then it's great, right? In fact, just as a small segue, you will realize that many of these consulting companies are much more diligent at talking to customers, gathering doing the right sort of understanding of what the customers want. Whereas if you go to large project companies, they're still stuck in Scrum of Scrums and all that, right? So again, see, basically the idea is always to understand what the customer wants and build a long-term roadmap around the customer. Building small pieces of that, you could do it as a small list of products, or MVP version 1, version 2, version 3. The basic ideas of building software will always be the same, right? So when we say project management, I also include things like high test coverage. I don't really take it as an engineering practice. It's a delivery practice. So if once you learn delivery practices and you know that they work this way because of a certain reason, you're able to reason that out, they'll work everywhere, right? Of course, when I say they will work everywhere, as long as you're learning and taking some signals, right? It's just, think about it this way, right? You learned over a period of time, you learn maybe 5-6 things that you will really believe in, right? Very dogmatically. Like I've been in places where I would go and tell people that if you don't do this, you're an idiot, right? But at the end of the day, out of the 7, when you apply to a project, 2 of them might not work. Change them. As long as you're humble enough to know that you're wrong, your opinion was held very loosely, although it was there, and then you change that, I think it's fine. Right? As the moment you say, okay, no, this is what I've read in a book, or this is what I've experienced in a project last year, I'm not going to change it, there's something else that is wrong that we don't know, then nothing's going to work, whether you're in a consulting company or outside. Right? I think the part where I would say the difference between an organization, a practice that is followed by a consulting company versus a product company, is where the agency to make decisions is very low when it's a consulting company. What they get is a project that's like, fully analyzed and, go and like deliver. When it comes to a product company which is building products for itself, they have the ability to iterate at a much faster intervals, much like smaller intervals. They have the ability to change track much faster than when some other company from outside is building stuff for them. And so when you look at that aspect, you start thinking in terms of, okay, when I look at building a piece of software that maybe someone, like, let's say it's a B2C stuff, right? A consulting company will not even have access to, for example, all the metrics that the product company is actually capturing, right, while they're delivering. The product company is actually capturing those metrics, and they can look at that data and then churn faster. So I think that's the, this good of working in a product company, because you're much closer to the ground. But that also means there's more turbulence, right? So you'll see that people behave very differently. A consulting person will feel very bad about throwing away code, versus a product engineer in a product firm which is churning fast at a startup level, for example. They should train themselves not to feel bad about, I wrote this for 5 days and now I have to delete it. So there's a lot of stuff around, that area. I think is the sense of ownership that people have should be very high. I'm talking about ideal cases. And when your ownership levels are high, your behaviors change, and therefore your processes that you follow, you can cut some slack over there. Right? So if, for example, do you need sorry, I'm not really good at Scrum, but there's like 10 roles over there. Last I read like 15 years back. Do you need those many roles? You don't. Right? Does a small team with all the roles that are there to be like good enough to be able to execute enough? Do you really need even a manager? You may not need a engineering manager even in a very close-knit team. So, but in a consulting company, you can't do that, right? You need somebody who will manage the client. You need somebody who will represent the people, and billable rate. Exactly, right? Somebody needs to manage the calendar and the billing. So,
Yeah, I think it ties down to what you said, that I think consultancies invest in having better project management and program management and all of these things, whereas product, some part of me feels that it kind of gets mixed. Like it kind of also gets in a product company. I don't know, because I've never worked in services, but I have also seen it getting enmeshed with people management. Like it is sort of used as a carrot to measure people. Like you say that different teams need to apply different strategies, but generally that's not how it happens, right? Like it's the organization decides something, it's trickled down everywhere, and then you start benchmarking velocities against teams, against BUs. And so, I know these are not the way things should go about but that just seems to be how it is scaling. And I think that is where I find it a little frustrating, because
I know. See, if you cannot change, honestly, I would tell you not to work in a place where these kind of things are happening. Sorry, it's very blunt and very direct, I know. But if you're working in a place where people don't understand the first principles of project management, you're not gonna have a great stepping stone to the next level in your career, right? You'll have to find something else. Like, I
And
mean,
I'll add my 2 cents to it
Yeah.
as well. I don't think then the project or program management craft is understood in that organization. Because couple of things, right? When you were saying, is Agile needed there? Probably yes, because you would know, you would want to fail fast. If something's not working, you would want to know that early in the cycle versus spending a year building something which is of no use to anyone, right? So it makes sense if it's even if it's a large long-term delivery, and you have a annual planning cycle and a multi-year roadmap, because that's when Agile actually has a lot of benefits for you. But from what I understand, the practice and the craft itself is not understood there, in its true intent. That's a different problem altogether. Okay.
Hi. So yeah, my question is around maybe the planning process that happens, like quarterly, half yearly, things like that. So what has your experiences been in maybe different contexts? Like, what has worked well, what has not worked well when it comes to quarterly or half yearly type of planning?
So I have seen planning which has happened once a year, annual operating plans. I've seen ones which are quarterly, half yearly, as well as release planning, which are aligned to once a month, right? So again, going back to what Ranjan said earlier, depending on the scale, the strategy that you're trying to deliver to, it makes sense to have different cadence. But most product companies, they would have an annual planning cycle, because you're trying to figure out what you're going to deliver during the course of the year. But it has to go through iterations, and there has to be ceremonies where you can figure out how well you're tracking to those milestones, right? So which basically means you have quarterly checkpoints and planning sessions for to map back to the annual planning cycles. So that's been typically the most frequented format that I've seen personally. So Ranjan?
Yeah, I think from that level down, and I mean, she's right, I mean, most companies do that. I think the key thing is to track it down to prioritization. Ultimately, at the end of the day, most of the time what happens, say 100% of the time, plans are always too hard to achieve. And I mean, that's just the nature of the game. Very, very, very few places when very lucky teams are able to achieve exactly what they started out to do. And that's where I think true agility, shines. When, you started out thinking you'll do 5 things, 3 months in, you realize that you can't do 5 things, you can only do 4 things. So that is where having a clear idea about what is priority for you and keeping that in mind comes in, right? And then over a period of time, you realize you can only do 3 things, so now you have to drop 1 more. And maybe 2 after 3 more months. So last quarter, you realize you can only do 2 things out of 5 that you started. And to be able to give up all that, 60% and say, I'm going to put all my eggs on these 2 and winning, I think 40% conversion on plans. I don't know if you agree or not. 40% is huge.
We would like to state higher, but
I know.
that's the realist.
Yeah. So I mean, see, the thing is, it's with every plan. When you start out planning, it's an amazing time in every organization. It's frustrating as well because too many meetings and all that. But everybody's looking at the future, and most people bring their optimistic self, right? And that optimism multiplies sometimes into unrealistic goals. I think the places where I've seen being very successful are places where people are very clear about what their priorities are. Right? At any point in time, they know that if I have like this is the bare minimum that I need. And maybe if there are 20 streams or 70 streams or however many, all of them know exactly what is priority for them. Um, and they all know that all the three levers that there's quality, budget, time, right? And I mean these are the three three levers that you have. You change one, the other two, or rather you have to drop one for the other two to be met. So you can deliver something at a cheaper and faster, but the quality might actually suffer. And as long as you're able to reason with that, I think it's great. But a lot of places that fail, they fail because at all points of time they want to keep doing all the things. No matter when they know, like half year in, they know they're failing, they still want to do all the things. Right? And they want to achieve everything together, and they start throwing, let's hire more people if they have budget, or if they don't have budget, then make people work longer. And I think they start missing out on the values that they started with. That let's say they start with people are important for us, but 6 months in, people are working at night. People are not healthy when they come up in the morning, and so yeah, I mean a lot of things. You can see symptoms everywhere. But yeah, I mean, like I said, fundamental basis of achieving on a plan is to know what are the most important things. And so dogmatic approach would be, if you would say, thumb, which is don't have more than 40% must-haves in your backlog, right? And I mean, yeah, dogmatically you can say yes, 40% must-haves. Is that really like non-negotiable? It is negotiable, but going back to the reason why you do that because you know that there's a huge chance that you will miss out on your target. So if you were doing 100% must-haves, 3 months in, you're not able to achieve that, you're hardly going to ever have time to work with another team which is probably dependent on you. So you're going to delay. So in a grand Gantt chart of every company, one small pipe gets moved forward, everything starts moving forward. So yeah, slack in the system. These are first principles, right? Like understanding cues is extremely important for project management. Understanding and ability to do value stream mapping. If you don't know these things, project management is not, like I said, astrology. There is some art, but there's a lot of science that you can apply. Apply queuing theory, apply the measurements that you're collecting, apply improvement plans on them, have Slack in the system, know why you need Slack in the system, not the chat app, but actual Slack, right? If you do not have Slack in the system, then what happens? What are the signals that you see? These are things that cannot be easily taught in certification courses. It's something that you fail miserably, and then you start realizing that there are some good books. I mean, if you guys want, I can recommend. But ultimately, it's a lot of great learning, working with great people who've seen this before. That's how it rubs off, right? I mean, we say ThoughtWorks. I spent 10 years over there. I've never read a book about extreme programming, right? I still do, but I know a lot because I worked with colleagues who taught me how to think. And I mean, I probably would have gotten fired if I was still working there by saying this, but I honestly never read any book about Agile or extreme programming. I've read a book about Scrum. That was 2004, probably the last thing that I wanted to engage with.
Yeah. No, but you've hit the nail with the prioritization conversation, because I think the problem of too many is what strikes us, and trying to get everything done, because sometimes it's so difficult to let go of the pet project. And I think that's very well said. Thanks, Ranjan. Any other questions? So as we wrap it up, Ranjan, key takeaways, or how would you like to give your parting thoughts to the engineering leaders and the project and program managers out there?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, always remember the first principles. Do not dogmatically follow anything. There's always going to be one or two of those things that will not work for you. They'll probably hurt you more than help you. And at every stage of an organization, even within an organization, teams are at different stages. Different processes apply, different processes don't apply. So being able to understand that, and like I said, first principles approach of understanding scientific method, understanding where queues are being built, how to do capacity planning, how to make sure that you have enough slack in the system so that you can do the right things. Technical debt in a startup is like a free money. In a big company, it's debilitating.
Yeah.
So all of these are things that you can read in books. You can find spots in there. But every project, I'm sure good project managers would be able to write a new book for every project they do, because it's a different. You never cross that river twice.
Thank you so much, Ranjan, and that was really insightful. Thank you, Pramod. Anything else? Or it's a wrap from us. Thank you so much.